My upset number, the business secretary, has even said he hopes these laws are never used. And the reason for that is that they're a smokescreen. They're not a serious proposal to resolve these matters. And the government would be far better taking these issues seriously, getting down to negotiate, rather than bringing forward emergency legislation like this.
The government's anti-strike legislation will be debated in the Commons today, but the Labour Party will be voting against the measures. Why is that? Let's ask Jonathan Reynolds, Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Industrial Strategy, who joins us now from Stalybridge in his constituency. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Why will you be voting against the measures?
Well, quite simply, this is a bill to sack workers, sack nurses, and what this country needs is to recruit more of those essential workers. So I don't think this is the right way forward at all. It's very important to say that we already have in this country voluntary agreements when strikes take place in essential services for life and limb cover, for emergency cover to take place. That already happens voluntarily. And where we don't have national agreements, it's usually because there are local agreements in place that reflect local circumstances. So that emergency degree of cover is there. And actually, to get to the heart of this, if you look, you've just listed there quite rightly a whole range of different parts of the economy, different public services where there are industrial actions taking place. You've got to go to why that is. And at the heart of it is it's been a very difficult 13 years for a lot of people in this country. Wages have not grown as we would expect them to. People are having a very difficult time. And the government's got to respond to that, not by making it harder, making it illegal or taking away unfair dismissal protections for people who go on strike. It's got to be willing to listen and negotiate. And all the evidence suggests that this kind of approach from the government actually will make those disputes worse. It will prolong them because people can't do the industrial action on the timescale that they would otherwise put forward. And it's a fundamental mistake. I personally think this is a complete sideshow. It's an alibi for the government to try and deflect from the fact that they are the ones responsible for the state of public services in this country.
Okay, I mean, you talk about local agreements being in place, that, that we don't really need this legislation because there will always be some kind of skeleton cover. And I mean, you can argue it both ways. A strike is supposed to have an impact. It's supposed to inconvenience people. It's supposed to show people I suppose, the value of having a full staff operating a particular service. But at the same time, if you're talking about nurses, if you're talking about people's appointments being cancelled, that is something that has an impact on everyone. And you could argue that that's something that needs to be guarded against, because we're not just talking about driving test examiners, for example, as important as they are, they're perhaps not as important or as urgent to people as getting an ambulance.
Yes, well, I mean, I think all work is of value. All work will inconvenience people if strikes are called, if industrial action takes place. The first thing I'd say is it's not easy to go on strike in the UK. We don't have laws that make it easy to take industrial action. They've been successively, tightened from the 1970s onwards. There are very high thresholds to meet. They're even higher in public services that are deemed essential. So if a strike is called, if workers do vote for that, it's because they really feel very strongly about it. The second thing is that, I mean, if you look at sort of at the core of why people want to take action of this kind, they don't actually want to take it. And I think the bit of this I object to the most is the assumption from the government that these workers themselves don't care about the impact this will have on people. People who are on strike over the last few weeks and months, they know the impact it's having if they are essential workers and public services are affected. They know that. They don't want to go on strike. What they would like is the government to acknowledge and listen to them and negotiate. I mean, the nurses' strike before Christmas, they offered to call off that strike simply for negotiations, not for resolving the dispute. And the government didn't want that. And I think at the heart of this, after 13 years, is a government which is quite frankly embarrassed about the state of public services under its watch. And it sees in these industrial actions a chance to somehow try and switch the blame onto those workers themselves, rather than acknowledge that ultimately they are the ones who have to take and be accountable for the state of public services. And that's why you've got proposals like this. My upset number, the business secretary, has even said he hopes these laws are never used. And the reason for that is that they're a smokescreen. They're not a serious proposal to resolve these matters. And the government would be far better taking these issues seriously, getting down to negotiate, rather than bringing forward emergency legislation like this.
How, Jonathan Reynolds, how confident would you be about self-referring yourself to a specialist, as Keir Starmer has suggested?
Well, the first thing I'd say on this is we're not suggesting this for every kind of treatment. It does already exist for some kinds of care. The bigger message is this, that the NHS is really struggling after 13 years of Conservative government. Now, if we had the kind of economy after that time where I could just simply announce, a huge increase in spending to add the capacity that's required, well, that would be great. But that isn't the reality. So we've got to be willing to think about doing things in a different way, looking at how we can try and improve the system. It's a 10-year plan we want to put in place. We're consulting on the different elements to do that. But for some kinds of treatments, being able to go directly to the specialist care that you need, yes, I think that could play a role. And it doesn't mean we'll take GPs out of the system. It doesn't mean they won't continue to be the massive part of the system that they are. But I wouldn't want to get into a situation where no one can suggest new ways of doing things,
Of
because I
course,
think that would be the
no,
biggest threat to
no,
the
no, no.
NHS at all.
Of course not. But then the clear concern here is that, of the worried well, of people clogging up the system and of specialists then becoming inundated rather than GPs.
Well, I think, again, this is a consultation. There have been times in my life where I've known exactly what I need because it's something I've experienced before. I think actually that could play a role within there. But GPs will continue to be the fulcrum of the system. But it is a problem when people who have experienced the system will know you have to ring up very early in the morning to get a GP's appointment. They're under huge pressure. A lot of younger doctors tell me they aren't attracted to being a GP anymore because of the workload, and therefore the traditional partner where GPs are sort of in partnerships in local areas, owning their own property, that's less popular. We've seen big changes in my constituency as bigger groups come up to buy up those GP surgeries. So I think it's right to look not just at how we can get more resources and capacity into the NHS, of course, that's part of our plan, but also can we look at doing things differently if that would improve care? And having a consultation, being willing to talk about that, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Okay, Jonathan Reynolds, thank you. Jonathan Reynolds is Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Industrial Strategy.